Is work making you feel trapped in a cycle of stress and burnout?
I'll focus on the UK here. Imagine we put all UK employees' names into a hat. 9 times out of every 10, and that person would be disengaged in the workplace. In fact, the UK is almost the least engaged workforce in the world. Almost every second person that I picked out would be burnt out, and they would describe themselves as struggling or languishing. 3 out of every 4 would say that they've worked at a toxic workplace culture, and only 1 out of every 5 would believe that their leaders care for them. Training and empowering and developing managers as well to be able to create more mentally healthy team cultures and know how to better support their people. We do it through helping execs understand the relationship between well-being and business performance, to change the conversation around mental health from just focusing on problems to realizing that mental health is the foundation upon which we build our lives. Help employees to understand how to take care of their mental health, because they don't exist in a vacuum. They are within a culture and an environment. And that culture and environment either supports your mental health and well-being or it doesn't. And the truth is, in many organizations, it doesn't. We are in a mental health crisis within the workplace,
When and how did you realize that all the struggles with your mental health actually helped you understand your true purpose?
Being my full self in the world, expressing my gifts in the world, expressing my potential, but in service of helping others to do the same for a reason that really felt authentic and genuine to me. And I don't think, if I hadn't have hit rock bottom like I did a few times in my life, if I hadn't felt what it was like to just feel so empty and worthless, if I didn't know what that felt like, I don't think I'd have as much almost passion and compassion as I have today in wanting to help people find their own power to overcome those types of human experiences.
Is work making you feel trapped in a cycle of stress and burnout? Ever feel like the pressure from endless deadlines or a demanding boss, or both, follows you home, draining your energy and creeping into every corner of your life? Well, in terms of my personal experience with this, I've been so demanding. I found myself being so demanding, working late at night, even when there was no need to sometimes, and being really harsh and lacking self-compassion, like 100%. Over the years, I've been gradually replacing more and more their harsh judgment with self-compassion, and that's a massive, massive game changer. And enough with my stuff now, and let's get into today's episode. In this episode of the Zero Defeat podcast, I sit down with Steve Peralta, the co-founder of Unmind, a groundbreaking platform helping companies and millions of employees prioritize mental health in the workplace. Steve knows firsthand the weight of burnout, and among other things, he will talk about his personal journey that drives his mission. In this episode, he shares the great actionable tools and insights, from transforming a toxic work culture, creating healthier team dynamics, to reclaiming your well-being and restoring a sense of balance. This episode will leave you with great insights and inspiration to make work a place where you can find the harmony and peace we all need to nourish and cherish in our lives. So how do we transform toxic work habits into thriving ones? And how do we redefine success at work by protecting our mental health and perform at our best without burning out? Let's dive into this episode with Steve to find out more. And of course, do not forget to subscribe, like, comment, engage. This will help you always be up to date with the episodes. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok. And remember to always be kind in your comments. We cover delicate subjects on this show, so any disrespectful and unkind comment can be triggering for some people. And of course, remember that we do not offer mental health advice on this show. Please consult a professional for that. The Zero Defeat podcast is a space to offer content that highlights the power of looking after our mental well-being. And of course, if at any point during the episode you feel triggered or uncomfortable, by all means, feel free to stop watching. But now let's get into today's episode with Steve. So let's start from your youth, how you got into music, career, music and acting, and how that went.
Yeah, sure. So I was born in South Africa and spent all of my childhood in South Africa. I remember moving around, jumped from school to school, so quite, I guess, an unsettled time in those early years. Towards the end of my school career, I think I started to become quite rebellious. I almost got expelled for writing something against my school, and so I think that started to show some of my rebellious spirit coming through. I wanted to study music when I finished school, but I wasn't allowed to. I had to, study something proper, as it were. But I remember quitting. I quit my studies like 3 months into it, obviously much to my father's dismay. And this led to a period of being lost and reckless, really. I think I was kicked out of my house at that point for, I guess, just not respecting the rules and all the rest. I went and lived with a friend for a while, got into a major car accident with my friends. It was quite a upside down, topsy-turvy time. And at about the age of 19 years old, my dad said, maybe you should go overseas and see if you can find yourself, as it were. And I went overseas, went to England, so into London actually. I think on my second night there, I got mugged with a knife to my throat, lost all my money. I got mugged, and then they took off with my jacket and my money, and I ran away. And I was lost, and this was quite late at night. And I remember swearing at them and running away. But then because I was lost, I ended up bumping into them again. And then because I'd been swearing at them, they chased me. And these are the guys with knives, right? And I remember running through Vauxhall, and eventually I managed to, get away from them. But it just sort of set the tone for my early days in London. I didn't have any money, and I found a dishwashing job. They paid for my taxi to the pub where I was going to wash dishes, and I did that for a bit. Such a wild few years, I guess. It was at that time that I started struggling with my mental health. So around about the age of 19, my mental health, I started developing insomnia. And really that lasted for almost 10 years. So I did really random odd jobs, got fired from random odd jobs for a few years. I mean, I did like police lineups. I did random things. So I really didn't have any sense of meaning or purpose in my life. And then at about the age of 23, when my parents are going through a divorce, I got the opportunity to come back to South Africa, doing what I wanted to do, which was music. Got into jazz, loved it. I loved the freedom of jazz and just being able to improvise and really connect with musicians, and a lot of call and response, all that kind of stuff I really loved. Started doing well at my music and in my jazz. I found out that my sister and mom had entered me into some music TV competition thing. It was called Project Fame. And I went ahead and did it. I did the audition. I made it through, kept on making it through, and then ended up making it to the final 16 who were going to be on live television 24 hours a day for like 3 months. I did pretty well in that, got down to the last few. And then because of that, I came out of the house, because we stayed in a house, and I was now some like celebrity in my country, which was very bizarre. Like people knew who I was and coming to ask for autographs, which you're sort of unaware of all the stuff going on because you're stuck in the house most of the time, but they're filming you all the time, right? And so that was interesting. That ended up getting me roles in theater and television and so on and so on. And so I had a career in music and acting and performing for about 7 years. But what happened, I guess, during that time is it reintroduced me to old habits and unhealthy lifestyle, which I guess just worsened my mental health. My insomnia got really bad again. And as much as I loved music, I started realizing that this entertainment industry was bad for me, right? And I decided at about the age of 30 to get out of it, but I didn't quite get out of it. So actually I was like 32 years old. I didn't quite get out of it. I got a role as a singer on a ship. And I ended up singing on a ship for like almost 2 years. There were 2 contracts back to back. At first it was novel and it was exciting and getting to travel the world, which was amazing, right? But then it also becomes quite strange not being part of the real world anymore. And so there were some challenges to navigate there. But what it did do for me was give me a chance to be in a new environment, away from some of the triggers of less than healthy behaviors, let's say. I had a lot of time to reflect. You can imagine, you're just looking out at the sea, and I got into my journaling and all the rest.
So it isolated you from negative habits.
It did. I guess it took me out of the environments that were maybe triggering or fueling my negative habits, let's say. An environment has a lot to do with the habits that we sort of play out, as it were. And so I think this just shook me out of that and gave me an opportunity to do things differently. Started getting into exercising, buying lots of books whenever I was on land, books on like spirituality and psychology and philosophy. And I started reading a lot, started writing a lot. I had my guitar with me. I started writing a lot of music as well. But I just started seeing my life in a different way and envisioning my life in a different way. And I started almost planting the seeds of like a more meaningful, more impactful life back then. And then when I got back on land, I decided to try and bring this to life, as it were. The vision that I'd started to create for myself was one where I was helping people do something similar to what I was starting to do for myself, which was find more meaning, find more purpose, find more energy, so effectively help people with, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual well-being. Like I had this as a vision. So what I decided to do was use the body as an entry point to this. And I qualified as a personal trainer. And even though that's not what I wanted to do, I saw it as a way to start working with people. And it was great. It was a great opportunity to help people. So I did that for a while. But as I said, it wasn't enough for me. And so I became it's called a check practitioner, almost like a holistic lifestyle coach, and a lot more. I started finding myself working with leaders, especially like leaders who are struggling with the demands of stress in the workplace, but they wanted to be high performing. And a few of them started to invite me into their organizations to give talks to their employees. I did that for a bit. I was standing by my stepfather's bedside in hospital, and we thought he'd had a heart attack, but he'd collapsed from just ongoing chronic stress and strain at work. He had a full breakdown, as it were. And I remember him telling me about just how stressful and strained things had been. And it centered largely around his boss, who was the CEO of a large car manufacturer, and just how he was treating him and treating others. There were colleagues who had died by suicide in his company. And I just remember thinking, geez, like something must be seriously wrong in workplaces. And maybe he lit a fire to improve things, right? So after realizing that there must be something seriously wrong with workplaces, and how especially leaders and managers were relating to their employees, I really doubled down on this space, and I started working as a workplace well-being consultant within organizations. I started giving more talks. I started through this really understanding what some of the common pain points of organizations were: strengthening relationships, managing stress, prioritizing well-being, and really integrating that into how organizations worked, integrating it into their ways of working. That then led to me being approached by the founder of a mindfulness company called Mindful Revolution. And he asked if I'd like to join his company. And I did, and that involved creating mindfulness programs for the workplace. And I'd go in and deliver these programs in person for teams, etc. And again, this was just further helped me to understand people's experiences and problems and what was helpful for them. And I got to a point where I asked myself the question, I love doing this is great, but how can I help more people? And it seemed that the answer to that was technology. To really scale what I was doing, I would have to find a way to bring technology into this. Now, I am not a techie at all. Throughout my whole career, I've just almost just followed my passion. That's what I've done. I mean, it sounds trite and cheesy perhaps, but that's what I've done, and I've just put myself in challenging situations and over the time it sort of got me to where I am now. But anyway, back then I partnered with the founder of that mindfulness company. I said I had an idea to create a digital platform that was going to help people with financial, emotional, and physical well-being. And so he had the capital, I had the ideas, and so we sort of partnered together, and I worked in this for a while. It was called Illuminate Wellness. And then it was at that point, and it was actually through that founder of the mindfulness company, that I was introduced to a guy called Dr. Nick Taylor, and he was working in the NHS at the time. Nick and I met in late 2015, but through this mutual connection, my business partner at the time. After a few conversations, what I guess we realized was that we were trying to do the same thing, or we wanted the same thing, which was to improve people's lives and workplaces, right? But we were coming at it from different angles and different perspectives. So him being a clinical psychologist, he was immersed in problems, right? And helping people to understand and address their problems. So that's the almost the problem side of the mental health spectrum. I was helping people to tap into their potential. Like I was, working as a coach, and it was more the positive well-being side of that mental health spectrum, which are both really important. These differences could sort of come together and offer a really comprehensive way of thinking about mental health and well-being in the workplace. So this went back and forth for a while, and we got to a point with this previous founder of the mindfulness company. We got to a point where we decided to start the company. So at the time, it wasn't called Unmind. We didn't have a name yet. I remember going back and forth for a while trying to come up with a name for the company. Became quite obsessed about it, actually. Some of the front runners for names were things like Pando and Biloba and Glia. Those were the three. I mean, thinking about it now, I'm glad we didn't go with either of those three, but we landed on Unmind.
So when and how did you realize that all the struggles with your mental health actually helped you understand your true purpose?
When I look back on my life now, and I look back on my struggles, and I did struggle for some time, like, a decade or more, I definitely see them as the almost like fertilizer from which my life has grown from today. And once I had started, I guess, envisioning a different kind of life, one where I felt like I mattered and I had something to offer to the world, this spark of wanting to express my full potential in the world, I really felt that spark sort of come to life, as it were. And I became quite obsessed about it, this idea of being my full self in the world, expressing my gifts in the world, expressing my potential, but in service of helping others to do the same. That kind of connection between the two started to become very real for me. I kept on doing that because I knew that it was for a reason that really felt authentic and genuine to me. And I don't think, if I hadn't have hit rock bottom like I did a few times in my life, if I hadn't felt what it was like to just feel so empty and worthless, if I didn't know what that felt like, I don't think I'd have as much almost passion and compassion as I have today in wanting to help people find their own power to overcome those types of human experiences. So I think it's really important for me, my dark past, as it were.
So tell me now about Unmind.
Yeah, so we started Unmind in late 2016. Nick and we didn't have a tech background, so we brought on two other co-founders. The problem that we were trying to solve was stigma around mental health in the workplace, the fact that mental health wasn't really even a thing that was prioritized in workplaces either. And we wanted to change the conversation around mental health from just focusing on problems to realizing that mental health is the foundation upon which we build our lives, and that it's one of the most beautiful things that we have. And we needed people to recognize that taking proactive care of their mental health was important. And so this was our focus for those first few years. It was very employee focused. It's not enough to just support employees and help employees to understand how to take care of their mental health, because they don't exist in a vacuum. They are within a culture and an environment. And that culture and environment either supports your mental health and well-being or it doesn't. And the truth is, in many organizations, it doesn't. You can just look at the statistics to get a good sense of that. We still support employees, definitely, but we also help organizations to understand the degree to which their culture is either supporting or not supporting employee mental health. We do it by training and empowering and developing managers as well to be able to create more mentally healthy team cultures and know how to better support their people. We do it through helping execs understand the relationship between well-being and business performance. So we describe this as like a whole person, whole organization approach, something that is integrated across your workplace and your culture. We are in a mental health crisis within the workplace. I'll focus on the UK here. Imagine we put all UK employees' names into a hat and I started just picking out random names one at a time, right? 9 times out of every 10, and that person would be disengaged in the workplace. In fact, the UK is almost the least engaged workforce in the world. Almost every second person that I picked out would be burnt out, and they would describe themselves as struggling or languishing. 3 out of every 4 would say that they've worked at a toxic workplace culture, and only 1 out of every 5 would believe that their leaders care for them. And it's important to recognize that we're talking about human beings here, and how they feel at work ripples outwards, right, into how they show up for their families and so on. And not just that, when people are anxious and when they are stressed, they don't only have less access, they have less access to empathy, to compassion, and this can fray relationships. It can make people less resilient to change and uncertainty, which is a feature of the world today, right? It makes them more self-focused, less pro-social, and that's not a good mix for today's society and the problems we're facing, right? Poor mental health in workplaces is costing companies. I think last year the stats were over $1 trillion lost due to productivity losses because of poor mental health. Over 12 billion days lost to depression and anxiety each year. So this has a very real cost for businesses financially, proven cost. But also, if you look at it through a sort of a neuroscientific lens, we know that when employees are stressed and burnt out, their brains don't work as well, right? They're less creative, less able to focus, they're less resilient, they're less able to collaborate well and to connect well with others. Whereas when people are well and when they're experiencing more positive emotions more often, they're more able to access flow states, and they're more able to be creative and solve problems and relate well to one another. And that is what we need to navigate the world of work today. And that's what's needed to be high performing, really. And so there's the human side of it, there's a societal side of it, and there's the business side of it, which all make a really compelling argument for why we need to improve the state of mental health in workplaces today. And so we have solutions focused on the employee, but also solutions focused on the organization. So I guess I'll break that down a bit so you get a better sense of things. For the employee, we have Unmind Elevate, and this really is our massive library of mental health and well-being content and learning development program and short exercises and so on. And that can help with stress reduction, proactive mental health care. To be honest, it's the whole spectrum of mental health, and also across tools to help people cope with uncertainty, to manage stress, etc., etc. So it really covers the full spectrum. And that's focused on the employee to help enhance their psychoeducation around mental health. But then we also have Unmind Help, and that's almost like your typical EAP, which is access to a 24/7 helpline, so people can get the immediate support if they are in crisis, which is really important. And then we have Unmind Talk, and this is where you can speak with a therapist or a coach. And employees typically have one session a week that they're able to speak to a therapist or a coach, and this is free for the employee. We offer Unmind Managers, which is evidence-based and expert-created training and development for managers to help them better understand how to create psychologically safe teams and mentally healthy team cultures, and how to better support the mental health and well-being of their people. I don't know if you've seen I think it was towards the end of last year, there was a study that came out that showed that for 70% of people, their manager has more of an impact on their mental health than their therapist, which shows you just how influential managers in the workplace are. So if we can empower them to better support their people, that's a really important thing. We also have Unmind Exec, which is effectively strategic coaching and consulting for executives and senior leaders. And this is very data driven. So we're able to show the exec team the link between business performance and mental health and well-being. And linked to that, we have something called Unmind Insights. So we use that to engage the exec and senior HR leaders and the like. And this helps organizations to understand their employees' well-being, but also their culture and the degree to which their workplace culture and environment is supportive of mental health and well-being or not. And we do that by assessing key cultural factors across the organization. And then we're able to then show the impact that their current state is having on business performance and financial outcomes, etc. We help them to benchmark against other businesses, and then we help them to reshape their strategy and culture of mental health. So you can see it's a very comprehensive offering so that we truly cover all bases and take this whole organization approach.
And just before we move on to the next few questions, how urgent is for you to deal with mental health for leaders and employees right now based on today's situation? How bad, so to speak, is the situation?
The problem and the need to address the problem is an urgent one. We know that people are struggling today. And so certainly the crisis is an urgent one. But I also think in terms of creating a better world of work for our children, we want to start making changes today as well. And so the urgency is both with respect to employees' experience today. We want people to live lives of more meaning and vitality and well-being and beauty, but also for the future. I think changes need to be made today, especially with, let's say, the rise of AI now. It might present an opportunity for us to unhook from some less than ideal ways of thinking about the workplace and thinking about employees within the workplace, rather than to almost double down on it and make things worse. So I think now's an opportunity to shift things. We need to urgently address the issue in workplaces when it comes to poor mental health. We know that it is costing the economy trillions of dollars. We know that it is, to a degree, making people's lives worse, right? Like I've mentioned, 90% of UK employees are disengaged in their workplace. Almost 50% are burnt out. Many people are experiencing poor mental health in the workplace, stress, anxiety, depression. Like there's no hiding from it. It is a crisis that needs urgent attention. And if we keep on doing more of the same, we'll get more of the same. So to me, it needs to be addressed.
What do you think about the impact of AI on healthcare?
It is obviously going to have a transformative impact on healthcare, on mental health care, for a bunch of reasons. I mean, it will help us to be more precise with our interventions. You can draw on genetics and genomics, and you can draw on a lot more and analyze it far better than we can today. For example, we can make how we mine data quicker and faster. We can design more data-informed treatment plans. There's all that kind of stuff. Within the workplace mental health space, we're using AI already. We have an AI coach. But it's important to say that AI coach wasn't just like sticking ChatGPT onto our platform and letting it do its thing. Like this is ethics are really important given the space that we're in. And so we have a team that ensures that we are drawing on the right sort of source information to be able to then best engage with our users. I currently see our AI coach as sort of an augmentation of human support, and maybe even what people do in between therapy and coaching. There's some amazing stuff to come without a doubt, but it's so important for it not to be like the Wild West. There needs to be regulation, there needs to be ethics, and certainly at Unmind, we are approaching it in that way. So really exciting, so much potential to be of value, but it needs to be done carefully. The final thing I'll say on it is like, the way forward is not going to exclude AI. We know it's going to be, AI is going to play a major role in healthcare, in life. But what's really important is that it's, yes, high technology, but it has to be high life as well. That technology has to be in support of life, not the opposite, right? In some instances, the way that AI might be used would be not in service of life. It'd be making life worse. And we can just look at even at the way social media, for example, is impacting children's lives and making people's mental health worse. We don't want that to be the case. We need to figure out a way for it to be in service of our well-being and in service of humanity, right?
So what is for you the number one thing to remember about creating an harmonious workplace that can really look after everybody's well-being?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things for organizations and leaders to recognize is that their culture has such a large influence on their employees' well-being and also on their performance. Culture, it's how people feel in an organization, and it comes down very much to relationships and how people feel they are treated, right? And this is influenced to a large degree by leadership and managers. So it's really important. We know that the degree to which employees feel cared for and valued by their leaders and their managers is the degree to which they feel well, but also motivated, and the degree to which they're able to perform at their best. So important from many perspectives. It comes down to human needs being met. Things like autonomy. We want to be autonomous to a relative degree. We want to be self-determining. Needs like belonging and connection. We want to know that we matter and that the work we're doing is meaningful. If those needs are met, then people are more able to flourish. And so the traditional paradigm of command and control, which is still quite pervasive, I would say, it does the exact opposite to what employees need to be healthy, well, and to perform at their best. And so I think that this paradigm, sort of command and control, it's a hangover from the Industrial Revolution and, let's say, scientific management, which is born out of Frederick Taylor's approach way back in the 1800s, where he literally measured how long it took his factory workers to perform each task so that he could properly control their productivity. There's still leaders in organizations today who knowingly or unknowingly are thinking of and treating employees like cogs in a machine. It's quite pervasive. You just need to think of words like efficiency and productivity and scaling and output. It's such common terminology in organizations, but I think that's reflective of this pervasive machine mindset, right? Where the utility and productivity is the most important thing, more important than how our employees feel at work. And we know that that's not the right way to go about it, right? Because an organization is not a machine, right? And we're not cogs in a machine. We are organizations are a living ecosystem. Think about what an organization is, right? It's a collection of human beings working together. So it's no stretch to imagine that a living system emerges out of that. And when we really get that, when we recognize that like at a visceral gut level, we're forced to show up differently. We will treat people with more dignity, more respect, honor, autonomy and self-direction, and we'll invite people's authenticity into the workplace. We'll foster more human ways of relating to one another. We'll focus on people's strengths. We'll promote interdependencies and connection in the workplace. We'll importantly help people connect to the bigger purpose at play. An organization is not something to be controlled, really, if we get this living systems thing right. But instead, almost allow it to emerge, which all depends on creating the conditions for human potential to flourish. And I think this shift towards a living systems approach, it's still in process, but there are companies that are to some degree operating from this different mindset. And these are companies that prioritize people alongside results and prioritize purpose alongside profit, etc. And we can use something like the Fortune 100 best companies to work for as a validation for businesses who might be concerned about, oh, we can't do that, it's going to ruin our productivity and performance, etc. Because if you look at those companies, and those companies are ranked based on trust and leadership, work-life balance, feeling cared for and valued, and having a sense of belonging, and this is all based on employee feedback. Those companies that are in the Fortune 100 best companies to work for, they outperform the market by like 16.5%. Their turnover is dramatically lower. Their employees are like up to 70% more engaged, more high performing, etc., etc. And so it's important to recognize that. So I'm not saying that a business can't be successful, especially in the short term, if they treat their employees like cogs in a machine, because businesses can be successful, especially in the short term, but that's achieved at the expense of people's well-being and quality of life and so on. And to me, that doesn't sound like real success. And so, like I mentioned earlier, many organizations and leaders are afraid that if they let go of control and they focus more on employee health and well-being, if they do that, they're going to lose productivity and lose performance. But the evidence, doesn't back this up. There are examples of organizations that are more living systems focused, more focused on employee mental health and well-being, and they are doing well as businesses. And this is all to do with human potential. Like, these organizations recognize that positive human energy and human potential are like a key resource within organizations. And when you get that, then you create a workplace culture that respects humanity and helps to bring out the best in its people. And that's really what I'm inviting here.
So now, what would it be? One final takeaway after everything we've said?
Yeah, so my final takeaway would be and I think the pandemic offered us an opportunity to recognize this, that like life and work are intertwined. I think for too long we have thought of them as like these two separate things. I mean, even a term like work-life balance, work is part of life. And I think it's really important for us to recognize that we spend so much of our time at work, which has so much of an influence on the rest of our life. And so we shouldn't like pit them against each other. We shouldn't think of them as these two things that need to be balanced, etc., etc. Because when we do, we create more stress for ourselves, and we actually inadvertently end up sucking the soul out of both, which means sucking the soul out of our life, right? And so I think what's important is to recognize and to explore and discover for ourselves what we really value in life, like what is important, what we find meaningful, and then go about infusing that into both our work and the rest of our life. Spend time just looking out at the world and just recognizing how beautiful it is and how much of a gift life is. And in other words, take a step back from the hustle and bustle and just like work. We need to like, almost like the most important thing we can do is add more beauty to this gift, add more beauty to life, and enhance our capacity to add more beauty to life. And how can we add more beauty to life and more beauty within the workplace? And it all comes down to how we relate to one another.
Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so guys, this was our episode with Steve Peralta. You can find Steve's links in the episode description down below. And of course, do not forget to subscribe, like, comment, engage, follow us on Instagram and TikTok. And I have finished for today, and I wish you an amazing rest of your day, guys. And remember that our problems do not define us.